I went to my first ever cEDH tournament, and it was interesting to say the least. It went pretty well, if I must say so myself. I played my iconic cEDH Thras list, which I still don't actually own any Thrall tokens for this list, so I had to borrow a friend's. He was very generous. He also played cEDH Thras and was kind enough to hand me his tokens. Besides that, I was there with one of my friends who was playing Arkham Daxum. It was around a 34-player tournament, and I just wanted to show up and do my best. On the drive up there, I basically was talking to myself saying, I want to go at least 1-2-1 today. I don't care about top cut. I don't care about who they take. I don't care about how many rounds there are or anything. I just want to win at least one game, one round, and just try my best and have a fun time. All I really cared about was that my deck did its thing and that I didn't make any crazy mistakes. So today we're going to be going over each individual round, how I actually did, some of the lines that I ended up going through, as well as some of the hardships that came with my first cEDH tournament. So let's get right into it. My first round, I was paired up against my friend that I showed up with, playing Arkham Daxum in seat 1. I was in cEDH Thras on seat 2, we had a Tymna Thrasios player in seat 3, and a Rograk Thrasios in seat 4. The game started pretty well for me. There were not a lot of interactive spells going on at the start. I was able to get to a point where I had a Kinnan Bonded Prodigy on board, as well as having both of my commanders on board, accumulating Thrall tokens, and having Thrasios activations available. It gets to around turn 4 where I'm able to actually land a Seedborn Muse on my board, and you hear a huge collective sigh from everyone at the table because they didn't have a response. This kind of board state is absolutely insane for me because when you already have a Gaia's Cradle on board, all of your tokens make so much mana. You're able to have a Kinnan on board as well. You just make too much mana for the board to really do anything, and your Seedborn Muse allows you to do it every single turn. This kind of value put me in an incredible lead, and by the time it got back to my turn, I was in a great spot to win. But you know me, I'm a very tricky player. I was not going to try to push on my turn. I wanted to find my window. I wanted to find a point where I could win on top of somebody else. So I waited for that exact moment. And that moment would come very quickly because on my end step, the turn after I had landed the Seedborn Muse, after I'd gotten so much value, the Rogthras player tried to go for it. He cast a Born Upon the Wind, which allows you to play at flash speed any of your spells. This is a great way where people can start to win on top of other people, enabling flash speed. But little did he know, I had a Valley Floodcaller in my hand. The problem with having Valley Floodcaller in my hand and not on the battlefield though is that I did not have quite enough mana, and I needed to untap with Seedborn Muse on the opponent's turn, the Tymna Thrasios' player's turn. I needed this untap step, so I tried really hard and hoped and prayed really hard that somebody had interaction, and thankfully they did. The Rogthras player was not able to go for it, and I ended up getting an untap step, which I was very thankful for. I was in a position to just sit there and wait until I needed to go for it because of the flash speed thanks to the Valley Floodcaller. Well, again, that window would open up quite soon because the first spell that the Tymna Thras player rips was a Culling Ritual. This Culling Ritual doesn't completely blow me out, but it gets rid of my commander, it gets rid of all of my Thrall tokens, and it gets rid of my Kinnan, which I'm not a huge fan of getting rid of when it is a 1-card win condition with the Basalt Monolith that goes into my deck. So I needed to do something right then and there. The Rogthras player tries to durdle a little bit and tries to maybe push something, but they're not quite able to get there. So I decide to responsibly put a Thrasios activation on the stack. And the craziest thing is that I flip over my own Culling Ritual. This Culling Ritual, if I end up casting it, ends up being way more beneficial to me than it would the Tymna Thras. The Tymna Thras, yes, they wanted it to remove some of our pieces, but they mostly wanted it for the mana so that they could set up their own board state. However, if I cast the Culling Ritual, I would get that mana, which would completely stop them. It also puts the Timna Thrasios player in a really rough spot because they ended up having a counter spell which will come into effect later. I think on this Culling Ritual for about 2 minutes before deciding I'm going to put it in my hand and figure out what I want to do from there. Then the Rog Thras player as well as the Arkham Daxon player are really trying to beg me to cast this spell, but I decide to go with a different line. I had a Diabolic Intent in my hand, and I had a Birds of Paradise that I felt that I could sack to go get, you guessed it, Basalt Monolith, which is a non-creature spell that I can cast at flash speed with Valley Flood Caller. Was it a weird time and weird moment to go for it? Absolutely, but nobody was expecting it, which means that the Diabolic Intent did not get countered. And again, this will be important really shortly. Nobody counters the Diabolic Intent, and I go get that Basalt Monolith. Then on top of that, I cast the Basalt Monolith with Culling Ritual still on the stack. I then proceed to make infinite mana and demonstrate that I can go until I get a Finale of Devastation, put Thassa's Oracle onto the battlefield, and then draw my deck in response, which then will win me the game by putting Thassa's on the battlefield. Now, if for whatever reason that spell ended up getting countered, I still had a Noxious Revival in my deck, which I could have back on top. I then also had Born Upon the Wind in my deck, which means I could just cast the Thassa's if I ended up drawing it instead. So out of nowhere, I put a win on the stack and was able to win. Now, the reason I say that Diabolic Intent not being countered was important was because my opponent, the Timna Thrasios player, had a Swan Song in hand. But again, this line was so weird, it was so out of nowhere, there's no way I go tutor for a Basalt Monolith of all things. So he allowed it to resolve. And the thing is even more important, Swan Song does not counter artifact spells, which means the Basalt Monolith was able to resolve. This win was out of nowhere. I was shaking. It was my first tournament game ever, and I was able to take down a win. So we go up 1-0. The next round would not be as quite exciting as the first round was, but it certainly was a banger of a game. I was seat 1, we had a Glarb in seat 2, we had a Plagon Lord of the Beach in seat 3, and we had a Ral Monsoon Mage in seat 4, which thank goodness. Because I'm in first seat, I take a greedy hand, a hand that has a ton of value to it and is able to get me as far ahead as possible. And boy did I get ahead. I was able to land a turn 2 Tevesh into a Growing Rites of Itlimoc, which immediately flipped over. And not only did it flip over a Hazel's Brewmaster of all cards. In case you didn't know, Hazel's Brewmaster and a card like Devoted Druid make infinite mana. And when you're playing Tevesh Thras, infinite mana is all you care for. So when I flipped that over, not only did I become a big threat, but also my game just got a whole lot easier. I am in a tremendous lead, and although I do pride myself on some good table talk, I also like to be pretty honest with the table. Yes, we're in a tournament, but I'm not going to try to lie my way through a tournament, especially my first setting. I don't want to grow a reputation. So anytime they say that I have a very strong board state, I acknowledge that I have a board state, but I try to be as transparent as possible with what my plans are. The turn of doom is when I decide to halfway push. I didn't want to straight up go for it, but I didn't want to not try to present something at least, because you never know what the Glarb next to me could go for, which turns out he was able to go for a win on his turn anyways, so it was good that I decided to try to push. I was in by far the most commanding position at the table, so I decided to play a Green Sun Zenith for X equals 2. In case you didn't know, Devoted Druid is a 2 CMC card, which means that I'd put Devoted Druid on the battlefield, activate it twice, play the Hazel's Brewmaster, and then make infinite mana and try to present a win. And again, this was called the turn of doom in my book. What then proceeded to happen was 30 plus minutes of my opponents trying their damnedest to play spells on top of my spell, to cast spells over top of each other, to try to gain flash, to eventually a Ral trying to present a win of his own on my spell, on top of a Demonic Tutor, on top of a Wandering Archaic trigger, and on top of my Green Sun Zenith that had tried to resolve almost 15 minutes beforehand. There was a lot of table talk, there was a lot of bickering, there was a lot of arguing, and there was a lot of please do not try to go for this. Knowing what I know now, I think it would have been smart to call up a judge to try to make sure that slow play was not happening. Although there were a lot of things going on, I truly felt that some of the decisions took a little too long to resolve, which meant that my Green Sun Zenith was just sitting there on the battlefield, and Green Sun Zenith for 2 can get a Devoted Druid, but it can also get a Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. Now again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Kinnan would also make my board state insanely powerful, but if it meant that I got one extra turn because I just get a Kinnan instead of Devoted Druid, I think I 100% try to go for that. Either way, it was a very, very long stack battle, which ended up having the Green Suns being countered. Now, I didn't really care if it got countered because I also had an Eldritch Evolution in my hand, which at that point I decided, screw it, we've been here long enough, I'm just going to jam a win. And the Eldritch Evolution, after all the Rhystic Study draws, the Mystic Remora draws, and everything else, I was not able to get my card either there. It got countered again. Because of this, I was not able to present a win, but not all was lost yet. I still had a Valley Flood Caller eventually get to be put onto the battlefield, and I was ready to try to go for something on the Glarb's turn if I found a window. The problem was, by the time it got to Glarb's turn, there was only 6.5 minutes left in the round. I just played a ton of spells that was able to stop the Glarb player so I could force a draw. To say I was upset about the end of this round would be an understatement. I really felt that because of the stalling, because of the 3-to-1 teamwork on their end against me, really kind of sat wrong with me, especially in my first tournament. But hey, they were trying their best to preserve their points in the tournament. And as great as it would have been to go up 2-0, I settled for 1-0-1. At this point, I'm still in the lead of the tournament besides one other player who has 10 total points because they ended up going 2-0. But due to my record, I get put in the first table. This table is the highest rated table. We are all 1-0-1 and we have the only 2-0 player in this pod. This is where things would get extremely dangerous for me and my Tevesh Thras list. I look down at my pod and I am sat with a seat 1 Atali, a seat 2 Atali, a seat 3 Rog Thras, and a seat 4 me, Tevesh Thras. The slowest deck at the table and also the last in turn order. Now, if you don't know this about Commander, turn order is by far the most important thing when it comes to how well you're gonna do. If you go first, you are incredibly ahead, especially as an Atali. And if you go last, odds are you have around a 13 to 15% chance of winning that game anyways. Now, your odds do significantly go up as the game goes on because then turn order doesn't matter too much. But when you're facing against 2 turbo decks, I realistically did not have any chance of winning this game. But we were gonna try our best anyways. Me and the Rogthraz player decide, hey, we're going to keep responsible hands and try our best to just draw the round if we can. But also, if either of us could go for it and eventually try to get there, we were going to try. At the end of the day, it is a tournament and we want to win. So we get into the game. We have a turn 1 really good setup for both Atali players. I get a decent turn 1. I think I play a land and a mana dork and pass the turn. And wouldn't you know, player number 1 is able to cast a turn 2 Atali, which we don't have an answer for, but we did have an answer for the spells they were able to play. They flip over a Twin Flame from the other Atali's deck, and we decide we do not want that copy to go off, so that is the first counter spell we play. They decide to pass it from there, and it goes into the second Atali's turn. That second Atali decides to try and land a Treasonous Ogre on the battlefield, which we were not gonna have. I decided to play Force of Will on that Treasonous Ogre. Me and the Rogthrice player are now in both incredible positions. The turn 2 Atali in seat 1 was not able to get there anymore, and the second seat Atali was not able to play their mana engine, so we were in a great spot. We then have about 2 turns to both spin our wheels to try to get into the game again, and we get to a point where we're actually ahead of both Atali players due to our teamwork to try to slow them down. However, it's still a Rogthras deck, which is faster than mine. So their board setup gets to be a little bit too much for me, and they try to cast an Enduring Vitality. Enduring Vitality, when you already have about 10 creatures on board and a Badger Mole Cub, is not a great idea for me. And we get to a point where he's practically begging me to let the Enduring Vitality resolve, and I really do not want to do this. So I try to get even more out of him. Eventually, we get to the point where, yes, you can resolve this Enduring Vitality, but you cannot win on your next turn. And he eventually has to agree to that term. This is politics 101. I don't know how I got him to agree to that, but he did. So I was able to keep my Mind Break trap for the Atali, and we get to my turn. On my turn, I top deck the absolute nuts. I top deck a One Ring, and I top deck a Seedborn Muse for my Tevesh draws. I'm then able to slam both onto the battlefield, and boom, the tempo has become incredibly far in my favor, and I decide to pass the turn to the Atali. And this was the turning point of the entire game. I am now in a position to easily win on my next turn if I get to untap with Seedborn Muse every single turn, and I have some interactions still ready to be played. But Atali is going to play Atali. They get to the point where they try to cast another Atali, and they flip over a Heat Shimmer from the second Atali's flips, which is not something we want to see. So we sit on that Heat Shimmer for quite a while, saying, hey, do we want this to resolve? Do we really think we can stop it again and get back to our turns? And eventually I asked the Rogthras player, hey, are you gonna help me if I try to stop this? And he decides he's not gonna try. So because he's not able to win and he sees the board state that I was in, he decided it's not worth it for him to try and stop the Atali player because he can't win on his turn, which means that I would win the game. So we get to the point where we decide to end up drawing this round. So I go to 1, 0, and 2. I'm now at 7 points, and because my wins and draws were very early on, I have a pretty decent overall win percentage because of the opponents I've been playing. So I'm in an okay spot to get to the final round, but I get put at probably the worst table I could possibly be put at. We go to round 4 and I'm put back in seat 1, which feels amazing. However, my other 3 opponents are 3 turbo decks. We have a Krark Silas, we have a Kefka Turbo list, and we have a Gwenem list in seat 4. Probably the most hell I could ever ask for a final round, but at least I'm in seat 1, so maybe I can get there still. And it looked like with the turn that I had, I was able to. I had a turn 2 Tevesh, as well as a Mystical Tutor to get Demonic Consultation with the Thassa's Oracle that was in my opening hand. I felt like I was in a pretty decent position as long as the turbo decks did not go off too fast. And it happens exactly like I said. On turn 2, I was able to land a Tevesh with some Thralls, and I was able to have mana up for the Mystical Tutor at the end of the Gwenem player's turn. But both turbo decks had a really strong start, but the Kefka did not have a strong start. So I thought maybe, just maybe they aren't able to punch. But sadly, the Krark was able to play an Adnaz on turn 2. And as bad as their flips ended up being, they did flip over an Underworld Breach and Lion's Eye Diamond combo. With a land drop into 2 mana Underworld Breach, they were able to get there on turn 2. So we fell to 1, 1, and 2. At this point, I got pretty dang nervous because I knew 8 points would be a lock to get into the final table because that's what the Krark Silas player was at, 8 points. I was looking around the tables, I was looking around the tournament, I was doing as much math as possible that I could in my head, but I didn't know if I was going to make top cut or not, and I started to get very, very nervous for how the day was going to go. I eventually came to the conclusion that I was fine with whatever happened if I made it or did not make it. My deck was able to do exactly what it wanted to every single game, and in rounds 1, 2, and 3, I was able to get to a point where I was in a winning position. Both rounds we ended up having to draw because of the situations around us, but I was still very happy with how my deck performed. In round 4, I was also in a great position to win the game, but I went up against 2 turbo decks and I didn't keep a super responsible hand. So realistically, I don't know if I win that round anyways. I was happy with how I performed. I was excited that I played my first tournament ever, and I was very pleased with how my deck went. So I decided, whatever happens, happens. And wouldn't you know it, I made top cut. I made top cut of my first cEDH tournament ever. They took the top 10, seat 1 and 2 went immediately to the finals, and I ended up being 4th seed at the semifinals table. So let's get into how that ended up going. My first ever tournament, and I get to the semifinals, and sadly, I'm in seat 4. In seat 1, we had Timna Thrasios. In seat 2, we had Kenrith, the Returned King. In seat 3, we had Yoshimaru and Thrasios. And in seat 4, we had me on Tevish Thras. The game was relatively okay. I think I spent maybe 2 to 3 minutes just looking at my first 7 in the mulligan, realizing that my tournament life was on the line and this was it. It's now or never. I have to get a hand that is keepable, and I ended up keeping my first 7 because I thought it was decent enough. And as we get into the game, it actually was pretty dang good. So I had a turn 1 mana dork into a turn 2 talisman, into a turn 3 Tevesh, because I was able to stick a Kinnan, make plenty of mana, and just go from there to try to set up a board state. However, the biggest problem in this game was that Kenrith, the Returned King, decided he was going to start hitting me in the face. Kenrith was a 5/5, so it puts me on quite a short clock in a longer game like this. We're all playing Gaia's Cradle strategies, so the game's trying to go as long as possible until somebody can shove something with enough protection. And eventually, this clock kind of runs out on me. I have to eventually just put something out on the board, so I cast an Imperial Seal on my turn, and then try my best to get to the next turn before I die. Luckily, I am able to untap on my turn. I tutored for a Hazel's Brewmaster, which is probably not the best win condition seeing that I have a Kinnan on the board, but when we get into how they interacted with me, it ends up actually being one of the better lines. I just got a little bit unlucky. So I get to my turn, 7 life, and I say, there's no time like the present. I have to push now. Otherwise, I 100% just die going into my next turn. And, I either lose or I lose. So, I go for the one where I have maybe a 1% chance of winning it, which is jamming my win. So I neoform the Mana Dork into a Devoted Druid. That works perfectly fine. The Devoted Druid resolves. I get everything that I need. Then I put down the Hazel's Brewmaster on the stack. Hazel's Brewmaster ends up resolving, and to my surprise, I'm able to target my Devoted Druid, but of course they have a response. The Yoshimaru Thras decides to cast a Noxious Revival, targeting my Devoted Druid, which would put it back onto the top of my library, meaning I can't exile it from my graveyard to make infinite mana. In response, I had a Mental Misstep, which was absolutely perfect for protection. However, in response to that, still with the trigger on the stack, I get Deadly Rollicked on my Hazel's Brewmaster, which would exile that as well. Luckily, I have a Swan Song, and this would have been perfect. This would have been the all-star moment, but they had a Pact of Negation to stop me, and that was my tournament life. Hazel's Brewmaster got exiled by Deadly Rollick and still exiled the Devoted Druid, which was in my graveyard from the trigger that was on the stack. I was completely blown out on 7 life, and I end up dying on my next turn to the Kenrith, who ended up winning the game. All in all, this was an amazing experience, and I had an absolute blast playing some cEDH with people I've never seen before, meeting new friends, talking to new people, and of course, making it to the semis and being able to actually jam a win in my semifinals round in my first tournament ever. If you guys enjoy content like this, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'm trying to do a lot more active stuff of just showcasing how I experience the game of Magic and things that I do within Magic. And so if that interests you guys, please let me know and I'll make more content like this in the future. I'm super stoked to have more tournaments like this coming up in my belt and have a lot more experiences to showcase to you guys. So thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this content, please like the video and please subscribe to turn notifications on. With that being said, thank you guys all so much for watching and I'll see you all next time.